What's up, people? I'm Shaggy, the opinionated hippie, and today we're going to be going down the Captain Beefheart rabbit hole. I'm going to be ranking and reviewing the 13 albums that he officially released, 12 of which during his lifetime. The 13th was released after he passed away, but when I get to that, it will make sense as to why it is on this list. This is probably the artist I should have first done after when I expanded my Frank Zappa. Originally, this channel was only Frank Zappa. I decided to expand it. I intended on doing Captain Beefheart first. He was obviously the most obvious choice. Willie the Pimp, Bongo Fury, Childhood Friends, Trout Mask Replica, the album that is the number 13th, not on the list, but the one that was released last. Frank, kind of the reason it wasn't released kind of has to do with Frank. Whole bunch of connections between Zappa and Beefheart. Also the fact that both of their music is like unlike anybody else's. But I had a really, really hard time ranking these. And when I originally sat down to do that list, I was like, I made a list. I was going to do the first video of non-Zappa stuff. I was like, I got to move stuff around. I moved stuff around. I never got satisfied with it. You know, the stakes are ridiculously not high, nor do they matter at all. But for my own sake, I wanted to do it right the first time. So after a couple years of doing other artists, I've decided I'm going to do it now. Mainly because a video, it was a Paris show from like 80, 81, early 80s, popped up on my YouTube, and I watched it and it was really good, and Captain seems to be having a good time and the music is good, so I'm like, I'm gonna do it now. If you're not familiar with Captain Beefheart, I think the music that I think at his best, his music is like if you take like blues, a healthy chunk of blues, you take some jazz, saxophone, some oboe, some marimba type stuff, that kind of how that would work in the jazz world. You take some good pop, you got some pop melodies in there. You take some rock and roll, maybe a little bit of psych. Put it in a blender, and you blend it up, but not too smoothly. Leave some kind of weird, awkward chunks in there. Then you take that solution and you turn it into like an insemination fluid, something that you could like inject into someone to make them pregnant. So you turn it into like a semen-like carrier, and then you inject that jazz, blues, rock, weird solution into like a beat-inspired, slightly psychotic spoken word poet, and then they get pregnant with that, and then they have a baby. Then you give that baby some acid, and you tell them to make an album. That's Beefheart at his best, if you ask me. But his music pretty much runs the gamut from that extreme sort of genre blending, almost undefiable music that is nonetheless brilliant, to stuff that is easily palatable, that can be heard on an AM radio station, stuff like that. So we run the gamut, but the best stuff, I think, is on the far end of that just, I don't even know what this is, but I really like it extreme. 13 albums. Going to try to run through this as quickly as possible. I don't want this to run too long. But yeah, I'm going to give you my list. When I'm done, give me your list. Tell me what I'm wrong about. Tell me what I'm right about. Complain, moan, whatever. You know how comments work. And that'll be it. We'll all have a good time. But anyways, that's it. Let's jump. Oh, of these, 8 of them I would say are S tier albums. Yeah, 8. I was going to go 7, but I've decided that 8, the one that will fall in the number 8 spot, I've decided that is an S tier. I've decided I absolutely love it. Spots 9. 9 is a high A. 10 is an A. 11, 12, and 13, I'm mixed about. I think 11 is really, really good, actually, but I don't know if I'd give it an A tier, but it's a really good album. And the ones that are the bottom of my list are good. Well, we'll get to them. Enough rambling. Let's get on to number 13. Number 13 is 1974's Unconditionally Guaranteed. I think everybody who played on this album, the musicians who played on this, which is like, some of Beefheart's just standard musicians who had been with him for a while, kind of all said that this was the worst piece of music they ever heard. It is the only one on his list that I think is very boring at times. It is very safe. There are definitely moments where you get a little bit of Beefheart kind of inspired eccentricity that seeps in, but for the most part, it's just kind of a boring, unchallenging, dull. It's not that it's just not a very good album. Like the first half of the album, there's a number of tracks that almost sound like they're demos or they're unfinished. The lyrics are kind of bad. I just like like as a hardcore Beefheart fan, I don't ever listen to this album. It's not even good enough for me to revisit. There are two songs I like though. There was one of the musicians who played on here said something along the lines that the first time they heard it, they were surprised at how bad it was, and they were actually surprised about how you listen to it. It actually got worse as it went on. I disagree. I think two of the best songs on this album, actually, the two highlights of this album, appear on side two. One is a song called I Got Love on My Mind, which I think is a pretty good, little interesting, again, it's not a crazy song, but it's got a good melody. I think it's got a good vibe. I think it actually works pretty well. And the closing song, in the grand tradition of all songs about peaches, is great. It's just a fun, silly, little kind of bluesy, upbeat rocker. Kind of reminds me of the presidents of the United States peaches at times. In fact, I think every time I revisit this and it starts, I'm like, wait, did they cover Peaches? It's a different song. But yeah, it's got that kind of vibe, and I think it's a pretty good song. Some of these I think are just bad. Magic Bee, I think, is bad. Happy Love Song, I think, is bad. Full Moon Hot Sun, there's a whole chunk of songs in the middle I just think are bad. So yeah, just not a very good album. Like, yeah, if you listen to anything else on this list and you start going down the rabbit hole, save this for last. I know there are people who think it isn't that bad. I'm not one of those. This is the only album I think is actually not a good album by anybody's standards, except for those two songs. Number 13, Unconditionally Guaranteed. Number 12 is his fifth release, Mirror Man. This is probably the only one on this list that I think, the only one and where it falls on this list that might be a shock to some people who are Beefheart fans. This was released as his fifth album, but it was recorded about 4 years earlier, released in 71, recorded in 67. And some of the stuff that is, two of the songs that are on here would appear on another album. And so it's stuff from a session that took place 4 years earlier that was eventually released. And it's 4 songs, and 3 of them, all of them are more than 8 minutes long. You get a 19-minute song, an 18-minute song, another 10-minute song, another like almost 16-minute song. And I just don't think they work. They're very, I guess, blues-based would be the closest thing that you could say. They're kind of really long jams that are pretty static and kind of don't go anywhere. A lot of harmonica. You get some interesting sort of solos in these jams. Harmonica solos. You get a lot of oboe playing by Captain Beefheart that's pretty interesting. But I just don't think they really go anywhere. I don't think they're that interesting. There are times I do listen to this when I enjoy it, but there are other times when I'll try to listen to this and I kind of check out early. I just don't think it's that engaging of an album. 2 of the songs, Candy Corn and Mirror Man, would be re-recorded, were recorded, I guess, re-recorded, or there are different versions on other albums, right? Essentially a much shorter versions of both, slightly different, especially Mirror Man. Candy Corn's pretty similar. Candy Corn, the 8-minute track, I think is by far the highlight of this album. I think that's a really, really good song. Mirror Man, the title track, is probably the second best song. But the 2 longer, but the Tarot Plane, which is almost 20 minutes, and then 25th Century Quaker, which is like 10. I just don't think they're that interesting of jams. This wasn't why I'm going to Beefheart. This is not what I want him about. I don't want these long sort of improv things. I like his writing. I like his sort of chaos that he creates. They're like compositional stuff. I like his spoken word stuff. Love his instrumentals, his like guitar instrumentals, or the, whenever he goes like a guitar and you get a marimba and they pair up. Love that stuff. This kind of stuff, this lengthier jam stuff, it's not my thing for Beefheart. Any other band, you give me a 20-minute song, it's probably going to be my favorite thing. Doesn't work for me for Beefheart, which is why it's at number 12. This has been re-released at least once. There's a bunch of bonus tracks on there, mostly stuff that would appear on other albums, like outtakes and stuff like that. But we're really just looking at the original album, and I don't think the original album is that engaging. It's neat to have this side of him. I'm glad it was released. I do every once in a while revisit it, but it definitely is number 12 for a very solid reason for me. I just don't think it's that good jam material. And with all the jam stuff that's out there, I'd rather hear somebody else go at length. But yeah, that's my number 12, the Mirror Man Sessions. Or I guess that's the full name, right? The Mirror Man Sessions? No, I guess it's just Mirror Man. Yeah, number 12, on to 11. Number 11 is Blue Jeans and Moonbeams 1974. And I don't care what anybody else says about this album. I think this is a great album. It is maybe not a great Beefheart album if you take what everybody thinks the description of Beefheart's music is, but it is a great album. It is a mid 70s AM radio, soft rock, maybe even a little Steely Danish album of just great, fun pop music. Like, it's not challenging, it's not chaotic, it's not going to give you a headache. It's kind of sweet at times, it's kind of saccharine at times. The Captain himself, I think, completely disavowed this album. I think the words he had for this were much harsher than any words he had for Unconditionally Guarantee, if I'm not mistaken. Apparently he apparently was just had these songs and was like not involved, something about him not being involved or just kind of forgetting about it. But apparently, like, his experience recording this album is a very negative one, which is why after this he recruited Frank to help him do his next one. He joined the Bongo Fury tour, was trying to spark that inspiration. I think this is inspired. I love this album. Again, if it wasn't his voice and you put anybody else's voice, you wouldn't know it was a Captain Beefheart album for the most part. It is his voice that brings the Captain Beefheart to the album. But other than that, I think it's a really good album. In fact, I think the best description of what this album is the second song is a J.J. Cale cover. He's covering J.J. Cale. It's that same old blues. Clapton covered this song. It's pretty much played straightforward, only it's Beefheart singing the lyrics, which I think makes them better. But yeah, there's this long song called Captain's Holiday, which kind of reminds me of like the Ween song Captain, that spacey song off Quebec. Like, maybe they heard this and were inspired by that, but it's just this long sort of instrumental, like very lengthy. It's like the longest song on the album at 5.5 minutes, but it just almost seems like really weird AM prog pop. It's just nothing Beefhearty about it. But man, I love this album. I think it's a fun album. I think it's a catchy album. It's sweet. It's pure. It's poppy. It's, if Trout Mask Replica, his sort of masterpiece of like head scratching genius, is on one end of the spectrum, this I think is the other end of the spectrum as far as like musical difficulty and popness. But it's the good end of the spectrum. This is not a quality spectrum. It's a difficulty pop spectrum. And this one, it's the opposite. It's the other side of that coin. But it's good. I like it. No complaints. The only song I used to not like was the J.J. Cale cover, but now I love it. So yeah, I don't know who to recommend this album to. Like, it is such an anomaly, almost an anomaly. There's another one in the discography that I think is kind of similar to this, but is a lot more Captain Beefheartian. But this one, it's just pure good pop music with that Captain Beefheart vocal edge. I like this album. I'm not a hater. This is usually at the bottom of, I think, every list I Googled. Nah, man, I disagree. This is some good stuff. I'm gonna put that good in quotation marks. I like it. But if you're expecting anything close to what everybody agrees are his best albums, no. We're far away from that. Not sure this is a good Captain Beefheart album, but it's a really, really good album of 70s pop music, soft rock music, AM radio music. Check it out. Let me know if you haven't heard it. I think it's worth a listen. It's fun, people. My number 11, Blue Jeans and Moonbeams. Yeah, the title alone says it all, right? Yeah, all right. On to number 10. Number 10 is The Spotlight Kid, his sixth album, released in 1972. It is another one that is, a little more accessible, well, definitely a lot more accessible than the ones that had preceded it, especially the immediate two that preceded it. It's still got a very Captain Beefhearty edge. It's definitely one of the latter albums, very leaning in a lot to the blues, or there's a very strong blues vibe in it. It definitely is a little more kind of slower and well paced and not as frenetic and chaotic as the two that preceded it. And you definitely have songs that I think are a little more palatable and a little more like could possibly have made the radio. You know what I mean? But it falls down here because I do think it's lacking a certain sort of spark or a certain sort of maybe fun, a sense of fun. I think that blues vibe just kind of dominates a little too much. And over the course of the album, especially as you get to like the second half, things just kind of run together a little more. And plus there are a couple songs that kind of annoy me. But some really, really good highlights. Like the opening, I'm gonna booglerize you, baby. Like probably the heaviest leaning into blues type thing. I don't think it works that well. It's kind of a grittier, jammier number that is not that good. It's good, but it's not great. But then the following song kind of slows it down, and you have this nice sort of ballad called White Jam that I think is really good. The first side ends with this instrumental called Alice in Blunderland that is just this great, almost Zappa-esque sort of instrumental theme. Kind of reminds me of like maybe something you would hear on Man from Utopia. Some nice like, I think it's marimbas, right? Some nice marimba work, just some nice percussion, a really nice, almost like normal guitar solo in the middle. I think that's probably the highlight of the album. Kind of like the title track. But then there's a song called Click Clack, which kind of has a train vibe on it and has the title Click Clack that I think is kind of and then you get some like, as it goes on, some more weird Captain Beefheartisms towards the end. Grow fins, there ain't no Santa Claus on this evening stage. Not a bad album. Maybe a low A minus, high B plus, but I think there's something just sort of like some sort of spark or magic that I think is lacking in a number of these songs. And when I listen to them, I'm enjoying it. I like the Beefheart. Feels like Beefheart, but it just doesn't linger as much as the top 8 all linger. So yeah, I mean, in anybody else's catalog, this might be ranked higher, but in the Captain Beefheart catalog, it's got to fall to number 10 because everything else is so ridiculously amazing. So yeah, number 10, The Spotlight Kid, his 6th studio album. Number 9 is his second album. It came out in 1968, Strictly Personal. And there's one thing I think I find very fascinating about his catalog is it almost seems like all of his albums come in pairs. His first 2 seem to kind of be coupled together. The next 2 that follow definitely almost seem to be like they're a pair. The Mirror Man Sessions is kind of an anomaly. And then you get 2 more, including like the one I just did, Spotlight Kid and Clear Spot, which kind of seem like they're paired. Unconditionally and Blue Jeans kind of seem like they're paired. Shiny Beast and Bat Chain are obviously paired. That's something we'll get to. And then the last 2 almost seem like they're paired. Like he was going through like a certain phase and he made 2 albums, one of which was either the much better version of those 2 albums and another one which was maybe a not as inspired version of that same vibe. Strictly Personal is the not as inspired version of the debut track to my ears. I feel like it's just some of the lightning in a bottle excitement that is on that first album is not here. The production on it, which Captain Beefheart later disavowed, it wasn't his response. He was on tour. Some production decisions were made in which like they use like try to make it a more like late 60s psych accessible album with like some manipulation or doing stuff with the sound or with panning or just weird like effects that were very of the era, very psych that I don't think it hurts the album, but I don't think it really helps the album. I also think some of the songs are just not quite as instantly memorable as some of the other stuff, but you do get some just great Captain Beefheartisms in here. You get him just like reciting lyrics without music. You get some pretty neat little jams in here. You get the Mirror Son of Mirror Man / Mirror Man. You get a shorter version of Candy Corn, which is one of the best songs on here. There are some good songs on here, but I think the overall effect is it just feels a little more like he's treading the same ground he did in the first album. And while that first album ground is like the top of a mountain and is like one of the best things ever, he's coming down like like to the next plateau. So he's not quite at the same heights. He's like maybe a third of the way down the mountain. And so it's just not as memorable, not as exciting, not as just like this is essential listening type stuff. Like I'd probably give it like an A- to my ears. But maybe no higher than that. Still a good album. Like I really, really like it. But yeah, that's where I would rank it. Number 9. I don't really have much else to say about it. Again, I look at the song titles and I like these songs. They're pretty good. But it definitely is one of those that I think, I don't know, it just feels like Beefheart was already bored with what he did on the first album, as we would soon find out on album number 3, but he felt maybe compelled to make another album. He had songs still in him. Obviously we know from these sessions there were really long jams that finally didn't make it out, as the Mirror Man sessions would prove. And so whatever was going on in here, it just seems like it wasn't what Beefheart wanted to do, and he wanted to do more. And when we get to the third album, we'll find out what he wanted to do, but this just seems like almost a holding pattern. It's a Beefheart holding pattern, so it's good, but it's a holding pattern. And now we're on to number 8, and these next 8 albums, I would argue, are all almost absolutely perfect. On to number 8. Number 8 is 1972's Clear Spot, hands down, without a doubt, his most fun, ridiculously engaging, enjoyable album. Yeah, it's a little more palatable than the other stuff. There were still some challenging ideas, and there were still some Beefheart being Beefheart. Couple of his absolute best songs are on here, even though they might be delicate little ballads, even though they might be things that you maybe could hear on a radio. There's a song on here that my wife agreed to put on our wedding CD when we got married, because it is something that even her relatives could listen to. But it is a great song. And this is the album that pairs with The Spotlight Kid. And almost all of these pairings of the two albums, it seems like the first album was the one that captured that lightning, and the second album was either him working the same territory but not as inspired, or him working the same territory in a slightly more controlled thing. This pairing, Spotlight Kid and Clear Spot, are the only ones in which Spotlight Kid tried to find him going in a more accessible direction, and it took him that whole album to figure out how to do it. And Clear Spot is a home run. It is an easy to listen to album. It's fun, but it's still Beefheart. Like almost every song on here, I think is fantastic. Low yo-yo stuff to open. Nowadays, a woman's got to hit a man. Too much time. Nice slower type things. Circumstances. My head is my only house unless it rains. Again, his softer stuff on here. His singing. His sincerity. The beauty of some of these songs is just ridiculous. Sun Zoom Spark. Sun Zoom Spark. Again, a little more aggression, but not that aggressive. Clear Spot, crazy little thing, that crazy little thing, giving some women advice for those crazy little things, long neck bottles, and two of the best songs he ever wrote. The one that we put on our wedding scene, Her Eyes Are a Blue Million Miles. Just kind of reminds me of almost like, not, it doesn't sound like that, but Her Eyes Are a Blue Million Miles is kind of like what Zurich is stained is to Pavement's Slanted and Enchanted. Just this little island of just perfect guitar playing and perfect vocals, and it's kind of sweet, but it's also beautiful, but it's also Beefheart's poetry, and it is an almost perfect song. And one of his best songs ever, Big Eyed Beans from Venus. Great slide guitar work in this. Just great song. Distant Cousins. There's a limited supply. Just his vocals, everything about Blue-Eyed Beans from Venus. The jam, the energy, that long, low, sustained note that just kind of floats for a while in the middle before they just go back into the song and tear it up. Sight After Dark, that channel that does reviews, if you haven't checked them out, recently did a Big Eyed Beans from Venus reaction video. If you haven't heard that song, maybe check them out first because they appreciated it and they loved it. It's a good way to get your foot in it if you want to go the YouTube way. And then Golden Birdies to close. But yeah, it's just a fun album. Some beautiful ballads on here, some really good playing, some really good rhythms. The production is nice and clean. Just an all around great album. Yes, it is of these top 8 the most accessible. A lot of this stuff could have been played on the radio. A lot of this stuff could still be played on like FM radio if they dared. But yeah, there is not a problem with that. Beefheart does not need to be weird, does not need to be chaotic, does not need to push the envelope. He can do this, and he does this. I'm not going to say as good as anybody because I hate that phrase because that essentially means everybody is the same. But man, this is good stuff, people. Good stuff. I recommend Clear Spot. I think it's a great album. My number 8. Number 7 is his debut album, Safe as Milk, released in 1967. And I think this is like, while this is definitely a Beefheart album, it sounds like Beefheart. It is probably like, I don't want to say it's simple because it's not simple, but it definitely sounds like kind of a psych blues album with like your necessary sort of Beefheart twist thrown in both his vocals. Ry Cooder's on guitar in this. The playing is great, but the songs are great. But it really does feel like if you were to take Beefheart's vocals out and replace them with Grace Slick's vocals, I think a lot of these songs could pass as like really good quality Jefferson Airplane songs of the same era. The guitar playing on some of these, and especially even on the album that follows, has a very Yorma type style to it. That sort of very kind of thin but piercing psych sound that Yorma has. I think you can hear that on some of this. But yeah, we also have just some great blues songs, some great, very attacking songs. We have an absolute sort of pop psych masterpiece in Yellow Brick Road, which always reminds me of Big Rock Candy Mountain. Kind of sounds like something that you might even find on one of Traffic's first 2 albums. But then you also have just these really good, weird, twisted sort of psych blues albums that have like, Beefheartian lyrics in them. But yeah, there's not a bad song. I think the flow is perfect. The entire album in its entirety is just like, like 33 minutes long. So you're talking all these 2.5-minute nuggets of like songs that really also could have appeared on Nuggets. That absolutely amazing, like psychedelic era, like sort of compilation album of the early 70s that try to document those one-hit wonders. Songs like this, one of these might have been on there. I don't think it was. But these are the kind of songs you could have found on that album, and you'd want to go down that rabbit hole and find out who this is. Electricity is probably one of the highlights on here. Plastic Factory, Abba Zabba's a good song. Like, there's not a bad song on here. The Closing Autumn's Child almost sounds like it could be like a psych hippie type. Any other psych rock band could have done, but it's got that Beefheart flavor. Yeah. It's a great, great album. There was a re-release of this that contained a bunch of other tracks, including tracks that would be re-recorded and appear on albums like a decade later. So that's interesting to see that kind of pop up. But yeah, it is, I think, the most dated sounding of his in that it very much sounds like a relic of the late 60s. But it's essentially the best psych rock album of the late 60s. Like, there's a couple YouTube channels that do nothing but like have like people sharing like those 1 or 2 lost albums from bands that either never made it big or never recorded again or something happened. Like, if this was the only album, I think I've said this about another band at one point, but if this was the only album Captain Beefheart had, this would be a treasure trove of a lost classic psych rock blues album of the late 60s. Just a fantastic album. And there's a couple moments when you can see where he would be going in a couple years. But for the most part, I think it's palatable. It's like not that jarring of an experience as some of these other ones are. But yeah, really good album. S-tier album. Fantastic. But still, it's at number 7 because we still have 6 absolutely fantastic albums to go. And let's go to number 6 right now. Number 6 is 2012's, but recorded in 1976, Bat Chain Puller. So this album was recorded, and apparently because of legal difficulties Zappa was having, because I think Zappa was originally either going to produce this, right, or was involved with it, or was going to remix it, or something was happening with Zappa. But because of what was happening with Zappa, all of these songs got tied up in some lawsuit with Warner Brothers. So on the next 3 albums that Captain Beefheart did, he re-recorded the majority of these songs. 3 of them he did not re-record. One, Ape's Maw, which appeared on the following album, Shiny Beast, parentheses, Bat Chain Puller, only because he recorded that at home, like it's just him doing poetry. Ape's Maw, Ape's Maw. And then the other 2 were not released, which is Seam Crooked Sam and Odd Jobs, both of which are pretty good songs. Maybe definitely not the highlights of anything. It's nice to hear them. I'm glad when they came out. They provide some nice balance to the music. I enjoy them when I listen to them. But I don't think they're as essential as the other stuff. I all the other 3 albums that these songs appeared on have not yet been on this list. They will be on this list eventually. The next 3, actually, to give that away. But yeah, but I like these early raw versions. I came to this obviously in 2012 when it came out, so I had been listening to those other things for at least 20 years. And so while I appreciate there's some rawness to some of these, there's some maybe so the mixing is a little different. So some things maybe like a slide guitar solo is not as ferocious and dominant as it would be on a later album. And so the best part about this for me is I think it is a great album. I love the sequencing. I love the way the songs are arranged. I like the songs that are on here, and it's really neat to hear songs that, like, when this song ends, my mind immediately goes to the song that's on the original album. So it's neat to have those sort of juxtaposition of ideas. But I do think the other 3 albums that kind of became this album, that this one was, this is his leather. This is Captain Beefheart's leather. He recorded it, couldn't use it, but instead of actually being able to use the master tracks, he had to re-record the stuff. And then, it appeared on 3 other albums. Bat Chain Puller is on here, which would be on Shiny Beast. Seam Crooked Sam, unreleased. Harry and Irene. I do think of all of them, maybe Harry Irene, not Harry Ann, which would appear on also on Shiny Beast, is maybe the best of the original ones. I think there's a simplicity to this, and it's not as polished as the following one. 81 Poo Patch, Flavor Bud Living, awesome guitar solo piece. Not a solo, but like a compositional piece for solo guitar. Brickbats, Floppy Boot Stomp, phenomenal opening track off Shiny Beast. A carrot is as close as a rabbit goes to a diamond. Again, the guitar solo pieces on this, I think, were slowed down on the later albums, but they're still essential. Ode to Alex, the song that I like the mix on the later album better. Odd Jobs, Human Totem Pole, another absolutely stupidly fantastic song, and Ape's Maw. So yeah, that's what's on this album. It almost is kind of like a greatest hits of the albums that would follow it. But because it was intended to be like an original album, I included it in this list. I think it is a really good album. I think it is worthy of listening to, even if you have the other ones. Yeah, and I would check it out because I still think it's like an S tier album. I still think it's fantastic. But yeah, that's my number 6. Bat Chain Puller, Bat Chain Puller. Number 5 is Ice Cream for Crow, 1982, his final album. This is the one that I would pair with Doc at the Radar Station. They both seem to be of a similar quality, and that he's pretty much dealing in what are like, I'm not going to say normal song forms, right? Because it's not like we have a chorus, verse, chorus, verse, chorus, like a normal structure of a song. But it does seem like we have like your typical, just some self-contained songs with no other really random chaos thrown in. Again, the music is weird. It's got those weird Beefheart rhythms. You have songs which are just maybe spoken word. You have some instrumental pieces thrown in. Some in this case, a really long, nice instrumental jam thrown in, like a melodic type, again, something that almost sounds like an early 80s Zappa type instrumental thing that would appear on Man from Utopia. Why I think these things would appear on Man from Utopia, I don't know. Has one of his best songs ever in the 1010th Day of the Human Totem Pole. A song about a human totem pole and people trying to like get exercise and take care of their bodily business while living on this totem pole. Always reminds me of Dr. Seuss's Yertle the Turtle. Had to be where that was inspired from. But yeah, it's got some kind of like normal grooves. The opening Ice Cream for Crow is a really like dun dun, like a really just upbeat, like just almost danceable groove. The Host, the Ghost, the Most Holy O is kind of a neat sort of another one that has a almost a Talking Heads type groove in it. Semi Multicolored Caucasian is an awesome instrumental that is quite long, that is just some neat instrumental lines in it. Again, completely hummable. And then we start to get to the more weird Captain Beefhearty stuff towards the end of the side one. Side two, I think, is a lot more difficult of a listen than side one, but still a great song. Ink Mathematics, just some great, just songs, but with really weird playing and guitars doing crazy stuff and rhythm doing crazy stuff and his vocals again being very poetic, but poetically kind of weird and trippy in a weird Captain Beefheart way. But yeah, 81 Poo Patch. Yeah, just a really, really excellent, nothing wrong with this album. More difficult listening than something like Clear Spot or even something like maybe Safe as Milk. We're getting those more complex Beefheart instrumentals behind underneath the lyrics, but at the same time, a lot more accessible than the top two albums on this list, or even a little more accessible than the one that is going to be next on this list. But yeah, a fantastic S tier, phenomenal album. My number, what is that? Number six? Number five. Number five, Ice Cream for Crow. Number four is his penultimate album. It came out in 1980, Dock at the Radar Station. And again, this is another one that, like Ice Cream for Crow, has pretty much just like songs, right? Like what, 3 minute songs. One runs like longer, 6.5 minutes, probably the highlight of the album. But again, the rhythms are weird. The guitar playing is not your typical guitar. It's not like a verse chorus type structure. The lyrics again are weird Captain Beefheart lyrics. But again, it's good. It's challenging but rewarding. It's challenging but not hitting your head against a brick wall challenging. Like the more you listen to it, and the more you like know what to expect, the easier it becomes to listen to. But it's just filled with excellent songs from start to finish. Hothead, Ashtray Heart, the beautifully A Carrot is as close as a rabbit gets to a diamond. The only band I think the best did Beefheart after this, I don't know if anybody's heard of Henry Cow, but Henry Kaiser, almost anything Henry Kaiser did, he has a couple albums which he does a lot of Captain Beefheart covers, and he does these like solo guitar pieces just beautifully. Run Paint Run, Sue Egypt, Brickbats. Whole first side is perfect. Second side, Dirty Blue Jean. This might be the best batch yet. Telephone, Flavor Bud Living, another great solo piece. Sheriff of King Kong. The highlight of the album, The Sheriff of King Kong, longest song on this album, easily the best. Making Love to a Vampire with a Monkey on My Knee. Again, it is sort of a difficult album, right? It's not easy listening, but it's a lot more palatable than, say, the two that are going to be the top two on this list. Not quite as accessible as Ice Cream for Crow. Doesn't have those like easily identifiable grooves that you might hear other bands do. It's very much a Captain Beefheart album, but I think he is almost at this point where he's just writing songs that are a little more conventional in his world. So it's definitely, maybe in the, like if this is Trout Mask Replica and this is like Blue Jeans, it's somewhere over here, but not quite all the way over here. But still, just a phenomenal album and really good and definitely worth checking out. And this, an Ice Cream for Crow, and the one that is going to be next on this list, all the material from that Bat Chain Puller, that's where they ended up. They ended up on these albums. And yeah, It's a really good album. Yeah, my number 4, Dock at the Radar Station. Number 3 is Shiny Beast Bat Chain Puller. Puller. This came out in 1978, right? And this is the album that I think is the most diverse, the best sort of, if you had to create a platter of Captain Beefheartisms, I think this is the best album for that platter. The one that is number 1 on this list, I think, does the best job of presenting all the most perfect sides of him. But if you want to water it down a little bit and make it not as difficult, this album is the one that I think prevents so many absolutely perfect sides. The floppy boot stomp opens up, and again, it's just like this really aggressive sort of bluesy, percussion driven, just weird song about, I don't know, about the devil, and I don't know what's going on. I mean, it's an aggressive, out of the gate, just punch you in the gut and like just go at it type song. But it's like, it's not that like jarring musically. It's just Captain Beefheart. Tropical Hot Dog Night has a tropical vibe to it and is almost kind of silly. It is silly. Ice Rose, beautiful instrumental. Harry Irene, a little ballad about Harry and Irene. Don't know what it's all about, but it's a nice little sweet song. You know you're a man, a little more aggressive. And then Bat Chain Puller, which is just this weird Beefheart song with some great poetic lyrics and just your weird sort of energy that he would sort of lean into more on like Dock at the Radar Station. Like, so you have things that kind of sound like Dock at the Radar Station, things that kind of sound like Clear Spot, things that are maybe a little more Ice Cream for Crowish. You got a lot of different styles on this one album. Side 2, When I See Mommy, I Feel Like a Mummy. Some absolutely fantastic Bruce Fowler trombone playing on this. That is ridiculous. This is just a kind of a silly song, but kind of a more dramatic, almost proggy type thing with like different parts, but whatever, but a longer, nice jam. Ode to Alex, I think maybe my favorite song on this album. Slide guitar part on this is fantastic. Kind of a ferocious little bluesy rocker. Candle Mambo, the name, it's kind of a Candle Mambo. Again, another little silly song, kind of like Tropical Hot Dog Night, a little lighter fare, but it works. Love Lies, Suction Prince, and then Apes Ma, to close out, which is just like he recorded it at home on his tape recorder, a little a cappella poetry piece. But yeah, like it's just a perfect album, right? And you have so many different flavors of Beefheart to choose from. You got some challenging stuff. You got some easily digestible stuff. You got some really nice bluesy stuff. You got Bruce Fowler playing some ridiculous trombone. Yeah, it's just another fun listen. I would say his 2 most fun listens, if you're in like a lighthearted Beefheart mood, would be this and then Clear Spot. And then if you're willing to really, really sacrifice your musical values, Blue Jeans and Moonbeams. Those are like the candy store albums. But this one's maybe a little more, maybe a little black licorice in here just to really check your candy love. But other than that, yeah, just another perfect album. My number 3, Shiny Beast, Bat Chain Puller. Number 2 is 1970s, right? Lick My Decals Off, Baby. This is the album that followed Trout Mask Replica, which obviously, since there's only one album left on this list, has to be number 1. And this is, this is sort of like Trout Mask Replica, but with sort of the rough edges kind of smoothed out, the sort of chaos kind of trimmed down. It is still a challenging album. And it is still a lot of some of the musical ideas that you would find on Trout Mask Replica, only they're more streamlined. They're more like, I don't know, Zappa's not producing the album. So Zappa's intent to sort of capture this moment in time on Trout Mask Replica is kind of gone away. And now they're just kind of focused on the music. And so they're not looking to put in like editing decisions or production input or anything that would happen on Trout Mask, which I'll talk about in the next video. It's just sort of a cleaner album, but it's still incredibly challenging. Just great songs. I don't even know what to say. Another beautiful, absolutely phenomenal guitar, like a written guitar piece in Peon that is absolutely beautiful. A couple nice little sort of instrumental jam, I guess, for lack of a better word, in Japan and a Dishpan. We got some really neat lyrics and like "I Love You, Big Dummy," some good singing. On the second half, I really like "Petrified Forest," which is like a really short, sort of pretty intense, almost like a short 2 minute punk song. It's almost like Beefheart doing punk, but it's weird, convoluted, twisted acid punk. Not really punk at all. Yeah, just a phenomenal album. Just great. Great titles. I Want to Find a Woman That'll Hold My Big Toe Till I Have to Go. Flash Gordon's Ape. But yeah, it's not an easy album. It is a challenging album. It is like full of like those weird where like if you're only it's playing in the background, it sounds like musical chaos. With the rhythm section doing one thing, the guitar player. How many? We got two guitar players on here, right? Only one guitar player. I mean, it says Zoot Horn Rolo, I guess is the only one playing guitar. But you just have all of these lines kind of competing with each other, and it sounds like it's chaos. But when you're actually paying attention to it, you realize that no, man, a lot of that chaos it's all written out, right? It's meant to be played that way. And the more you listen to it, the more you're like, oh yeah, it makes sense. And it's almost like a lot of the lyrics and the delivery of the vocals almost seems xenocronous, where you would record the vocals completely separately and then you put this music over it and just see how it matches up. But the more you listen to it, the more you realize how there are pockets and Beefheart's in those pockets and the music all makes sense and it all works together. And like, it is truly one of those albums, along with the one that is number one, where I think the more you listen to it and the more you know what to expect, the more you can fully appreciate the mad, mad genius that is behind somebody who would write these songs and create this type of music. A lot of backstory to a lot of these albums. I think a lot of this is like, a lot of these songs came out of like Beefheart just kind of improvising on the piano and recording it, and someone taking these improvisations and like pulling out the best parts and making full band arrangements of it, something along those lines. So the amount of thought going into like, this is going to be a song is kind of not there. It's kind of like, oh, we have this piece of music. Let's get some lyrics and match. So it is almost synchronous in that way. But at the same time, it also all feels fully intentional and fully purposeful. And you're never really sure what is just mad, happy accident genius and what is pure intentional genius. But yeah, a great album. This is the one I had a hard time making this list because I've gone back and forth between one and two many, many times. And there are times when I like this album better than the one I have number one because of the one, it's a shorter album, right? It's a regular 40-minute album. So it's not as overwhelming as the next one. And I think the sort of cleaner, more Zappa complexity and that sort of like Zappa intricacy, I'm not going to say that word, that more Zappa-esque style to the music to the nth degree, as opposed to the sort of Uncle Meat chaos of the other one. I sometimes like this one more, but I came to realize that I this is number two, but they're both perfect albums. On to number one. Number one is Trout Mask Replica 1969. Zappa produced it. One of the reasons I also delayed making this video is because I'm not qualified to talk about this album. I'm not sure who is qualified to talk about this album. This is four sides of complete genius. It is that description I gave earlier of like everything in a blender and you mix it up and then you impregnate somebody and you make them do spoken word, you give them some acid and you see what the results are. These are the results. It's a perfect album. It is not an easy listen. It is truly one of those albums where every time I listen to it over the course of my life, I like it better because I know what to expect. I'm used to it. Those things that I thought were like chaotic, I'm like, oh, this is actually quite a melodic little song. I get it now. The things I like about this album is it is four sides. If you have not heard this album, I highly recommend, if you can get the vinyl, not because it's necessarily vinyl, but because it's four distinct, separate sides that do not bleed into each other. When side A is done, side A is done. You got to make an effort to get up and put on side B, right? Or go to Wikipedia, go to somewhere, find out what the four sides are, and listen to this album in four separate 20-minute chunks. I think each side is perfectly sequenced. Each side usually has like a spoken word piece where it's just him reciting the poetry, reciting his lyrics. It's usually got a really good instrumental, whether it's like just a guitar solo, whether it's the whole band, not a guitar solo, but like solo composition. It's got that stuff. It's got blues little jam numbers. It's got pieces that are maybe a lot more like rough because he's recording them into a tape recorder and they're putting that out. It's got pieces that actually have melodies that maybe actually feel like a song. Like the first track, the first side alone is the perfect example of what you get. You get Frownland, right? Which despite absolute chaos underneath has a melody on top that you could see if a normal band did this, that melody could work as an actual song. Then you get something a little more Captain Beefheart and the dust blows forward and the dust blows back. Then you get a blues number in Decals Blues where he's like, Decals, he's just giving it his like growly howling wolf all. Then you get Ella Guru, which is almost like a pop song that XTC could have done. Then you get a beautiful instrumental in Hair Pie Bake One. And then you get Moonlight on Vermont, which is an almost perfect, chaotic, crazy rock song that ends with like talking about that old time religion and quotes some old time religion song. You know that song. You've heard it once you hear this. And it's so perfectly balanced. You have a little bit of everything on side one. And that kind of duplicates on side two. But sometimes it starts off with like a spoken word part. Sometimes it starts off with like a blues jam. Sometimes it starts off with like 4 minutes of a poem. Sometimes it starts off with an instrumental. But each side so well represents every side of this chaotic Captain Beefheart that I highly recommend you approach this in smaller chunks. Because what I used to do back in the day, because I got this on CD before I got it on vinyl, which was a mistake. Once I got it on vinyl and forced myself to slow down and listen to it, I learned to love it more. But you would get it on CD. By the time you're halfway through the album, like it's really hard to it's hard to differentiate sometimes because it is just like non-stop things you've never heard before just being thrown in your ears. This album, and I may do this sometime, deserves in its entire. How long is this video going to be? It's going to be like an hour by the time I'm done with it. This album deserves its own 1 hour video. 1 hour video. I'm sure someone's done it. I'm sure if you listen to it, there's probably somebody out there who's completely dissected it. It is genius. It is mad perfect genius. It's not easy. It is his Uncle Meat. It is his Minutemen's double nickels on the dime. It is a magnum opus of perfection, though it's not perfect. If I have a complaint, my complaint is Frank Zappa. Frank Zappa pulls a Quentin Tarantino a number of times on here where he inserts himself into it. He either puts something on there before a track in which like they're working on like fast and bulbous, and maybe they're mistaking it. So Frank interjects like, hey, I need you to do this. Or you hear Frank's voice. I don't want that. I don't even want Captain and like his band. Like, I don't want those outtakes. Just give me the music. There's enough raw stuff on here that I don't need those. You got a couple like what sound like home recordings of like Captain Beefheart doing things like on a tape recorder. Those are enough of the rawness. I don't want the producer interjecting himself in this. There's also a song called The Blimp, which is lyrics in which, who was it? I think one of, Siemens, right? Antenna Jimmy calls up Frank on the phone. He's like, hey, I got these lyrics. It's the blimp, Frank. It's the blimp. And he's telling Frank these lyrics. And Frank is recording this phone conversation. And he was in his studio producing, I think, Weasel's Rip My Flesh at the time. So when the song came out, he took the Charles Ives song, that dun 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 song, and he put the blimp over the Charles Ives song. So not only do you get a little bit of Mothers of Invention on here, you also get Frank's voice over Anthony Jimmy Siemens yelling these lyrics into a phone. I wish he had maybe just had the lyrics and not put the blimp in there. It is the one thing that kind of removes me from what I think is an incredibly magical musical world. And if that's my only complaint. Don't put yourself in here, Frank. Un-Quentin Tarantino yourself next time. If in another, there's a parallel universe where Frank's not on this album. But that's my only complaint. And it's a minor complaint. I just wish it was a little pure. It worked on Uncle Meat. I love all those recordings. I love hearing Jimmy Carl Black go on about his thoughts about the band. I don't need it on this album. But yeah, I don't want to talk about this album anymore because I'm not worthy. But it is a masterpiece. And if you listen to it and you hate it, give it another chance in small doses because it is worth the effort. Yeah, that's all I got, people, for Captain Beefheart, one of the greatest artists of all time. Yeah, I would say 8 of these top 8, perfect albums. Trout, Lick My Decals, Shiny Beast, Dock of the Radar, Ice Cream for Crow, Bat Chain Puller, Safe as Milk, Clear Spot, fantastic, almost great albums. Run the spectrum of everything Beefheart does. Absolutely, each one of those is worth owning and listening to and loving and cherishing. But let me know where I'm wrong. Let me know what I messed up on. Share your interesting Captain Beefheart stories or facts in the comments below. I know I'm pretty sure Beefheart has a fan base like Zappa, and there's probably things I missed or I should have. I didn't talk about the musicians. We needed a whole other video to talk about these incredible musicians and sort of what they went through in order to make music for Captain Beefheart. There's some interesting documentaries out there and books written about the horrors of recording for him. So that's a rabbit hole that's fun to dive down, but it's not for this video because I'm already talking too much. But thanks for watching. Subscribe, like, leave a comment, and go listen to music. And if you've never heard Beefheart in your life and you've made it this far, start with Shiny Beast. That's my recommendation. Start with Shiny Beast and go from there. Okay, I don't know. Peace, y'all. Talk to you later.